In high school, like I said earlier, I wanted to be a nurse, and so I took those kinds of classes. But um, after my senior year of high school, I worked as a nurse's aide at a county hospital, and I also got a scholarship to BYU, a full tuition scholarship, which at that time was $250. So it was $125 a semester to go to BYU. So that helped. I wanted to go meet members of the church. I was one of two members of the church in my high school class. And I wanted to go meet guys that were members of the church. And so I went to BYU. And that was just something that we were just going to do. And the first guy I dated at BYU was not a member of the church. So when Rod finished his last year, when he graduated with his master's degree in education, Doug was born. So I was working at Barbizon. I became pregnant, and 6 weeks before he was born, then I quit. And our first son, Doug, was born on June 12th, 1968. My mother came from California and stayed with me. It was a very challenging, hard delivery, but so worth it to get that baby here. And we were here like till he was 2 weeks old or so, and then we headed out to California. Rod got a job in Escalon, California. And during those times, there was no car seats required for babies like there is now. So we drove to California in a car with Rod and me and our baby right here on the seat between us. Nobody buckled in. It's kind of a scary thought now, but nobody buckled in. We drove out there. We spent a couple weeks with his mom until we found an apartment in Escalon. And we moved into this little apartment there, met some really nice friends there. Then we had our second son, Jason, was born in November of 1970. We lived in a house in the country that was real old and little for a while, but then we finally could afford to buy a house. We had friends that were moving, and they sold us their 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home in town in Escalon for $18,000. When Rod started working, his take-home pay was $421 a month, and we paid, I think, $95 a month rent at the time. And our budget was pretty tight, but we made it work. And then when we moved into our house that we bought for $18,000, I had these friends, and a lot of them were school teachers, but they had babies, little ones too. And so we had a deal to help me earn money. When they got called to substitute, I would babysit their kids. And there were sometimes, by the time I had 4 kids, sometimes I had 11 little children in my home for babysitting during the day. Jason was born there, and then I became pregnant with Ryan, and we moved into our new house on California Avenue in Escalon before Ryan was born, and had really nice neighbors there and more little kids to play with, and just loved having our own home. When we brought Ryan home from the hospital, we had Doug, who was 5, and Jason was 2.5, 3-ish in there. And we said, "This is your new baby brother, Ryan." And Jason says, "Lion?" I said, "His name is Ryan." He says, "Lion?" I said, "It's Ryan." And pretty soon he came back and said, "Hi, Tiger." So that was just something I want to remember, because that was so cute that little boy associated Ryan and lion and tiger. And then Rod got called to be bishop, and Robbie was born Ryan was born in September 1973. Now, my boys, it took me a while to get pregnant with each of my boys. And when between Doug and Jason are 2.5 years. Between Jason and Ryan are 3 years. Well, 2 years and 11 days later, I had Robbie. And it was great to have all these little boys. I did have a friend that when she'd say, if your budget is tight, bake a batch of bread for me, which is 10 loaves, and I'll buy it from you for $10. And that was a lot of money at that time. But when my boys were little, I made 10 loaves a week of bread. Robbie was born, and then 3 years later, we had Greg. And he was our little basketball player caboose of the family. So grateful that we had these 5 little boys. But when I didn't have them all, but when they were, and I was in this women's club, and we would have a boutique, and they wanted things to sell at the boutique. And so I offered to make 50 loaves of bread. And this was a very small town, and the newspaper actually came to my house and filmed me and took pictures of me making bread. And I have a picture of me giving a little piece of dough to Jason, who's reaching up for it. And I made it in the paper for making 50 loaves of bread for that, but I did make 10 loaves of bread every week for my boys. We made their lunches, and Rod made breakfast every day. Every day breakfast was eggnog and toast. And every boy wanted a couple pieces of toast, so we went through a lot of bread with their sandwiches and their toast. And I made it all by hand. And then my mother gave me a Bosch machine to use, and I started doing that. And then I just thought, I don't want to clean this machine. I'm going to do it by hand today. And the boys, we made their sandwiches. They came home. They didn't know I changed back to making it by hand, and they said, "Wow, Mom, I don't know what you did different with the bread, but it was so good today." So from then on, I just make bread by hand. I don't use a machine anymore. Then when Greg was little, we decided that it was time for us to leave California. The education system there was not doing well. So we came to BYU and interviewed, and Rod got a job as a teacher in Provo School District. So when my Greg was he had his first birthday in Utah, we upped our little 5 boys and moved them in a big moving van and everything back to Utah. We found some property to build a home, but we were living in a little rental up in Pleasant Grove. We built a big, beautiful dream home for us up on the hill in Pleasant Grove and lived in there for, we moved in January of 80, because we moved to Utah in August of 1979, and moved in there in 80. But then our contractor, who was our ex-brother-in-law, was a con artist, and we lost that he'd given out money from our bank account for other things, but not our house. And so our house had all kinds of liens on it, and we had to sell it and find someplace else to live. And so we sold it and moved into this house in fall of 1980, and have been here for 45 years, and we absolutely are so grateful, because that house was beautiful up on the hill, a great view, but one day my husband could not get the car home because of the snow, and he had to leave it down and walk 2 blocks up the hill on icy roads. So we were okay not living up there anymore. So when we lived in California, we had really good friends, Al and Marilyn Osborne. And when we moved back here, when Robbie was about 11 years old or so, Ryan was a beautiful little baby. Greg was a beautiful baby. Robbie was born looking a little bit like an angry little old man or whatever. People noticed that, but I thought he was adorable. But as he grew up, people would say, "Oh, Ryan, you're so cute. Oh, Greg, you're so cute. Hi, Robbie." And he heard this, and he kind of became a little bully and rebellious, and he was an angry little boy, and it worried me. And so when he was 11 or 12, we had contacted our friends, the Osbornes, who lived in the country. They had a swimming pool and horses, and they had helped other troubled children. And we had said, "We're going to come out and visit my parents. Can we leave Robbie with you for the second half of summer to work with him and help him?" And so we did. He didn't know, because we were there, and we said, "How would you like to spend the rest of the summer with them?" And he was like, "Yeah, nobody can tell me what to do. I can play and do whatever I want." So we kissed him goodbye and came back home. And that first day, she told him, "You see these weeds here in the front? pull them or you don't get dinner. Well, he dilly-dallied and he didn't get dinner. And he was really hungry that night and sad, and looking through the drawers and found breath mints. And then the next morning, Al woke him up and said, "Get up and get dressed. We're going to go to work. And get up, get dressed for breakfast. We're going to go to work." And he took his time getting ready, and Al said, "Go get in the truck." And he said, "What about breakfast?" He said, "You took too long." So he was really hungry by then. And so by lunchtime, he was ready to eat. Anyway, just long story short, for 3 weeks, he fought against them. He just was ornery, and he's written a book about it. It's called Charles Bailey and the Reformers, and it's 95% true and 5% very embellished. But anyway, after 3 weeks, he kind of said to his little 12-year-old self, "If I'm going to make it in this world, I've got to change me." And he did. He started being better for them, and he came home a completely different boy. Yes, and and his other brother was left with cousins, and they were both out there and did not have a great experience, but they came home just wonderful. And from then on, he started doing well in school, and parent-teacher conferences were not a nightmare, and it was so. After that, things got a lot easier in the family. After Rod and I got married and we lived in California for those few years, I was remembering back when I was young that I had really bad earaches. And one night my mother, it was right around my 5th birthday, she had taken me to the beauty shop. And that night I had a horrible earache, and I messed up my new hairdo and everything, but I was crying, and she came in and she decided to take me to the doctor. I thought it was the middle of the night. It could have been 9 or 10 at night. I don't know, but she drove me over to Hollister to our really nice Dr. Hare, I remember him. And he had a little couch in his room, and I laid down and he looked at it and he said that I had an eardrum that was ready to rupture. So he just said, I'm going to poke something in your ear. It's going to hurt for just a second, and then the pain will be gone. So my little 5-year-old girl just was brave, and I let him, and I think he lanced it a little bit, and then the pain was gone and the pus drained out of my ears. And shortly after that, my brother and I had a tonsillectomy, TNA tonsillectomy and adenoidectomy, and just was so grateful to have that pain gone. But ever since then, my ears are sensitive to the cold. And I have some earmuffs that my son Doug gave me for Christmas when he was about 16 or 17. They're made of rabbit fur, and I still use them. The weather may seem warm to other people, but I wear those earmuffs to protect my ears. But because of that kind of pain, and my husband also had bad ears, if our boys' ears hurt, we were really alert and sensitive to that kind of pain. And when Jason, I'm thinking Robbie was about 1.5 years, so Jason's about 6 or so, 6.5. He was yelling all the time. And when to talk to him, we'd have to yell at him. And so we took him to the doctor, and his ears were bad and his tonsils were huge. And then Robbie, at the same time, Robbie, as a baby, would be crying, and then pus would be running out of his ear. And so he had 3 ruptured eardrums in about 6 months. So I took Robbie and Jason to the doctor, and they were scheduled to have surgery. Jason had his tonsils and adenoids out, and Robbie had just the adenoids out. The tonsils were okay. And then they did a procedure called myringotomy, where they lance the eardrum and suction out all the gunk that's behind it to get it all cleaned out there. And after that, then they didn't have any more problems with their ears and stuff. But that was a time that Mom just needed to figure it out. Why is this boy yelling all the time? As a mother, I've learned that a mother has to be in tune all the time. They just have to be ready. I don't know that I hear the Spirit that much, but we have to be in tune and ready to act as needed. And the home that we lived in had a kitchen here, and a bathroom, and a bedroom, and a bedroom, and a bedroom, and then a big family room. And it was a long house from the kitchen to the family room. And Ryan was little and curious, but we had a stove that had push buttons on the back, so I thought, this is a really good stove. My kids can't turn the burners on. And I was in the back of the house doing something, and I heard this tiny little click, 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 barely. And I knew instantly that I had to run to the kitchen. And I ran down there, and my baby, Ryan, had pulled a bar stool chair up and climbed up and was sitting on a burner on the stove, pushing the buttons. So I grabbed him off before they got hot. But I just think, what if a mother doesn't act instantly on the spirit of those kinds of things? And then when Ryan was about 3, on Father's Day, he was sick and vomiting through the night. So I had told Rod, because he needed to work, you go and sleep in his room. I'll keep him in here with me. And I just kept a Chuck's there, so if he threw up, it was okay. I could take it off and just tried to keep him calm and me calm. But in the morning, he was kind of gray and panting. And so I called the doctor and I said, I need to come in. My baby's gray and panting and he's been throwing up all night. And they said, well, you can come in at 10:30 this morning or 3:30 this afternoon. And I said, I'll take the 10:30, which I'm sure saved his life. But I called a friend and she came over to stay with Doug and Jason. And I drove him. We were in Escalon, 10 minutes from Modesto. So it was about a 15-minute drive to the hospital. I drove him down and they checked him over and couldn't find anything. But when I got up to get my bags, the doctor noticed that instead of turning his head, he turned like this to look at me. And the doctor said, I think we need to do a spinal tap on this little baby. And so I went outside and cried. And they came out and got me and they said, you need to take him right to the hospital. He has spinal meningitis. And so I took him to the hospital and they admitted him, and he, throughout the day, would just he was getting glassy-eyed and looking through me. And I called Rod at work, and he came down after, and our friend with the kids was named Rebecca Grant, a lifesaver. I throw that name in because she's special to my boys, too. And she stayed with them, and he was admitted, and then he was in ICU for about 4 days. And I had told the staff, Ryan was a thumbsucker and a blanket boy. So I tore a piece of his blanket and I put on a big strip of fabric and I tied it to his little crib, and they would not let me stay in the hospital with him. They made me go home at night. So I said, keep this blanket with him and he'll be okay. And they threw it out. So I had to do it again. And I said, you can't do that. Just if he's got this, he'll be okay. So he was put in ICU and they just monitored him through for 4 days. They did a little cut down in his ankle to put in an IV. And then about 5 or 6 days later, he was brought into another room. And about a week after it, I remember him looking at his hospital band, and he goes, look at my clock. And I went, oh, he's going to be okay. So he was in the hospital for 8 days with meningitis, and we brought him back. And so that was a huge thing. And during that time, Robbie was a nursing baby, and we had friends in Modesto that she had raised five boys of her own and a daughter. She said, bring him to me. I can take care of him, whatever. She said she had all kinds of hickeys because he didn't want to take a bottle, but she got him trained on a bottle while I was at the hospital with Ryan during the day. So those are some of the adventures of when our kids were young. We had a dog, I don't remember the name, that tore her flank, and we took her to a vet, and he sewed her up, and I asked the vet, show me how to take the stitches out. And I'm like 17 years old. Show me how to take them out. So he showed me to lift up and clip underneath it, but not clip the knot off all the way and then pull it out. So I learned how to take stitches out when I was like 17. And so later when Ryan had, when Jason was little, he tripped and fell and hit his head on the corner of our fireplace. It was kind of in the middle, and it was a stucco wall. And I took him to the doctor for stitches, and the doctor says, if I numb him, it'll be a needle in each side, or I can just stitch it with one needle in each side. And so he stitched him without anesthetic, which creeps me out. But I was able to take that stitch out. So when Robbie was about 5 years old and he needed a haircut, but on a Sunday, he tripped and fell and the swing hit his head and cut it open and he needed stitches in his head. Well, a couple of weeks before, in Relief Society, they told us how Indians stitch their heads, that their hair is tough and long, and they would just tie their hair together, and that's how they stitched their head. They didn't need stitches. And so when Robbie did this, he's like, I don't want stitches. And I said, Mommy's going to take care of it for you. So I rinsed out his head really good, and got it dry, and I had Rod hold his hair on either side of the wound. Then I took a toothpick and took 2 or 3 hairs from either side, and I tied little square knots across, 3 little square knots across where he cut his head open. And then 3 weeks later, I clipped those little knots off, and it was all healed. We had a dog named Squeaker, and we loved her, and we would pet her, but when she was like 11 or 12 years old, she had this lump on the top of her head that felt like a garbanzo bean was underneath her head. And I was working for a dentist, and I said, have you ever done surgery on a dog? And he said, yeah. And I said, tell me what to do. So he did. And then he gave me the end of a little jar of anesthetic, and I bought a syringe from the pharmacy and came home, and I washed the dog's head really good. And Robbie had wanted to be a doctor, so I said, I want you to be my assistant. We're going to give Squeaker surgery. So we put a towel in the bathroom, and I took a brand new razor. I wiped it real good with alcohol, took a brand new razor blade and made a 3-corner flap, because they said make a corner so you know where to put the skin back to stitch it. And I tried to lift it up and it wouldn't come up, and I had to go through another layer. It was creepy, but I got it up, took that sebaceous fatty cyst out, and then swabbed it really, really good with hydrogen peroxide, and then flopped that back over and stitched her up. And she didn't want anything to do with me for 3 weeks, but she was good after that. So I did surgery on my dog and saved us some money. One night, all the boys in the neighborhood were playing at the neighbors, and they were playing a game that it's let's see, push the nerd or something like that, we'll call it. Anyway, they were going and they tried to push somebody down. Well, somebody pushed Robbie down while somebody was standing up, and Robbie hit on their head and he broke his jaw. But we didn't know it at first. He just came over and said, Mom, I can't move my mouth very much. During this time, I was working for a dentist, and I had a key to the office, so I took him down there and I did a Panorex x-ray to check. And it looked like I could see some fractures, but I'm not an x-ray specialist, but I saved the x-rays, brought him home. The next morning I told him, no breakfast for you, go take a shower. I took him to the doctor, and he said, take him to the hospital. I took him down there, and they did a Panorex. They looked at theirs, they looked at mine, and they said, we've got to admit him, he does have a broken jaw. So Robbie was had surgery on his jaw when he was about 3rd or 4th grade time. And when he woke up, when I told him, when you wake up from surgery, and if you start to cry or something, you're not going to be able to open your mouth. So I'll try to understand what you're saying. So he's waking up and he's like, I said, sweetheart, what do you go? And I finally said, do you need to go potty? So I told the nurses, if he acts frantic, just offer him a urinal. And we made it through, but that was a hard time for a little boy. He was a chubby little boy. I had purchased his school clothes, and he lost so much weight while he was on a liquid diet, and so I had to take big tucks in his little Levi's. But somehow we made it through that, and Robbie transformed during his youth from the chubby little boy into a slender, nice, good-looking person. And when he was on his mission, he says, Mom, people don't believe that I used to be a chubby little boy. So I had a page in my scrapbook of a chubby little boy and how he changed. And I took a picture of that and sent it to him to show them. And then a few years later, some boys came around here riding three-wheelers. And Greg was out there, and he was just little, 6 or 7 years old, watching the boys with the three-wheelers. And one of them fell on his hands. And his two hands got caught under the three-wheeler, and he pulled them out, and he yanked off this and this and this and this fingernail. He comes in with fingernails just hanging. So we removed those. We had to cut those fingernails off, and I just bandaged him and took care of him, and they were scabby and ugly, and I thought, how does the hand know to make fingernails again? But honestly, I was just so grateful for Heavenly Father's wonderful healing power and that the body knows what it's supposed to do. And in 3 weeks, little tiny cuticles were forming on his fingers. And they came back, and the nails grew out, and the scabs were gone. And in about 2 months, his hands looked perfectly normal again. And I just think so amazing what God can do to repair our bodies. I think that is just so unique and unusual. When the boys were little, they wanted nice, cool Halloween costumes, and so Doug wanted to be a Superman, and he was just so, he wanted the big letter S, and he thought it might be hokey, but I drew out the S and I made him a cool sweatshirt, a blue sweatshirt with the yellow S on a red background. And Jason wanted to be a werewolf, and I glued hair all over his face. And he wanted him to be a mummy, and we wrapped him up. And Robbie wanted to be a girl and a boy. So on one side we had a braid that I had a fake braid and put it on his hair, and the other side we made a beard. And I just tried to come up with clever costumes for the boys. Now we're living in Utah. One of the funnest camping trips we took the boys on was to a KOA in Nephi. And we took our great big tent, and while we were there, a huge, huge wind came up. It was blowing like crazy. We told the boys, get inside the tent, sit in all the corners, and we all sat in there. We didn't have Greg at the time. Robbie was little. We're all sitting in there to help hold the tent down with my boys in there to keep the tent from blowing away, because we would have all blown away. But I remembered while we were there, before we went, I researched different kinds of food to make when you're camping that's kind of unique. And so I take an onion, cut it in half, take out the middle and leave like 2 of the onion skin things together. I would mix up meat like a meatloaf mixture and make a ball and put it between the 2 onions and wrap it in foil. And I did that for each one of us. I don't remember what I did with the middle part of the onions, but throw them in the fire and just cook in the fire. And we had meatloaf inside of an onion skin. And it was really good. And then I would take an orange, cut the top off, and scoop out the orange pulp from the middle of it, mix up a spice cake mix, pour it into the orange rind, and then put the top on, wrap it up in foil, throw it in the fire. So we had some really fun meals like that when we'd go camping. Before we left California, we took the boys up to Yosemite and went hiking up there with them just to show them, and they were little. We still didn't have Greg at the time. And we found this neat hole and cave. I honestly do not remember if my boys, I don't think I would let my boys go in there, but I thought I'm going to go check this out. And I went into the cave, and I don't think that they came through. I don't know how they came around and found me. I really don't remember that, but I remember going through and squeezing through. And when I got to the very end, it was crazy. I had to somehow, feet first, go up over a rock like a worm would do and worm my way out of that cave. I got out, but it's still kind of scary to me to think that I went into a cave not knowing if I was going to get out. So the boys didn't do that one. We had a great big green van, and during this time, no seatbelts were necessary. We made a back end that was like a bed, and we could pull a seat up and make it all flat or put it down underneath. We figured a way to tuck it under so they could sit there and have their feet hanging down. And they would play back there and sleep back there, and traveling was really not hard because the boys could just go back and lay down and go to sleep. We did this one time when we were traveling from Utah and back. In the van, Rod was driving. He was getting tired. We did not want to stop the car because the boys would wake up, and it was time for me to take over driving, and it was an automatic. So, can't believe we did this, but Rod held the steering wheel. There was this big thing on the front that covered the motor. I scooched out of my seat and sat on there, and then I held the steering wheel where Rod scooted out from the driver's seat, and it was on cruise control, and he got out of the way, and I scooted in and then held it while he came around and sat in the passenger seat. And we did that all without stopping the car because we didn't want the boys to wake up. Okay, we did it. It worked. We only did it one time, but we did it. When we had 5 boys and we wanted to take them all to Disneyland, and I did not want to lose one of my boys, I bought some red, white, and blue striped polyester fabric, and I sat at the sewing machine and I made a shirt for Rod and me and all 5 boys, so that when we'd come up to a ride, they'd say, 7 of you, and they could see that we were all together. I did not want to lose one of my kids, and I figured if I had a shirt that matched my kid, if I lost one, I could say, he's dressed like me. So I did that for our kids, and they still remember that we did that. When we would travel with the boys and they'd get bored, nowadays my grandkids have videos in the car and stuff, but we didn't have anything like that. We would just travel and they'd get bored and we'd play alphabet where we'd look at signs and stuff. But I finally said, guys, Mommy knows a lot of songs. Try to think of a word, give it to me, and see if I can come up with a song with that word in it. And we did that a lot. And it was always just so fun for me. I just hear something and a song pops into my head. So I do have this thing where if Alexa is playing music with words in it that I know I cannot read, I cannot even concentrate. I just get drawn into it. So I do have this thing where I know so many songs, but it's fun. I've often thought if I was ever stuck in a prisoner of war camp and I couldn't talk, I could at least sing and sing and sing in my mind forever. And I think music is so healing and so important, and what you listen to has such a big effect on how you feel. And I just say, fill your heart and your mind with really good music, because I led the music in church since I was 13. It's another story. Brother Foxley came from Salt Lake City to teach young people how to lead music, and our stake had a thing. And so I went over, I think, 3 nights a week for 2 weeks to this little meeting with young girls to learn music. I learned how to lead music, and I led the music in Sunday school and in sacrament meeting and in primary. And because of that, I memorized almost all the hymns, and I just love singing to this day. Music is just a real strong part of my life. Doug went on his mission in July of 1987, and he was in the MTC on the 4th of July, and he and my parents went in the same time. And that was a really hard thing when we dropped him off and came home, changed the dynamics of the family from 5 kids at home to 4. And it was just, I needed to do something. We changed everybody's bedrooms around and stuff because it was really a change to a mama's heart. So he went there and served, and then when he finished, we drove to Arizona and picked him up, and I just couldn't believe what a mature face he had now. He just looked so much older. During those times, we got phone calls for Christmas and Mother's Day, and that's it. And I was just so happy to see him. And then Jason was called to serve Ventura, California, and he went in December of 1989. And it's still a new dynamic. It was a big decision for him whether or not to go. We said, you know what, whatever you decide, whether go or not, or now or later, we love you. Whatever you decide, you are our son and we love you. And then he decided to go. Ryan served his mission in Oklahoma. Don't even ask me what year it is. I'd have to figure it out. And he came home, and Robbie had his mission to Baltimore, Maryland. 6 weeks after Ryan got home. So 3 weeks after Ryan got home and 3 weeks before Robbie left, we had a combination homecoming farewell missionary meeting because we had family that would want to come. So we did that together. And then Ryan was home, and then Greg was called on his mission to Independence, Missouri, and served a lot of time in Kansas. And during that time, we added on this house, and the boys came home, and there was just, everything was just all getting upgraded and new.